Good morning, St. Francis, and good morning, people of God. It is Wednesday, the 15th day of the month of October, 2025. It is Wednesday of the 28th week of the year, the 28th week in Ordinary Time, and today we honor the memory of Theresa of Avila. So if there was little Tess, is Theresa of Lisieux at the beginning of October. Now we have big Tess, Theresa of Avila, come to the middle of October. Theresa of Avila, both of them were Carmelite sisters. Theresa of Avila was more active. She lived longer than Theresa of Lisieux, of course, but she was also more active in trying to reform the Carmelite order, which in the 1500s, as she was living in, had become rather lax and perhaps more comfortable in adopting more secular tastes and secular habits than it was a way in which they were truly living to the creed and the law or the rule of the Carmelite order, which itself is always an interesting question. It's like, who actually founded the Carmelites? People say Saint Simon's Stock back in Israel with the apparition of the Blessed Mother on Mount Carmel. Other people will be like, well, it was kind of just this group that kind of appeared out of nowhere. So it's always very interesting. Carmelites will probably tell you better who the founder and the ways in which they became, again, the order within the church. But at Theresa's time, the Carmelite order had kind of fallen into laziness, and so she attempted to reinvigorate it, and her attempts sometimes were not met with approval or met with fond embrace and whatever it is, and so she suffered a little bit because of trying to bring her community back to its calling and to what it should be and what it should be, within the church and the role it should play within the church. So remember her, and again, and the struggle and the success she did have in being able to call the sisters of her community back to the truth of what the Carmelite order represented within the church. So our readings for today, though, continue with Romans. And again, Paul just begins Romans with this great harangue, this great negativity, probably calling, because again, if Paul is in the greatest cosmopolitan city of his time, there are many different layers and many different influences perhaps coming upon the Christian movement, which may be moving it in directions that are not good, not true, and not helpful for what the message of the gospel happens to be. And so this whole idea about being sincere, about being authentic, in saying that if you are a believer, that this is how you act, and to not treat God as kind of a pastime, because God is not happy with that. Again, either you give yourself fully or you don't, and again, it's the more that you live a life that is attentive to what it is that God asks us to be and God calls us to be, then the more, again, our lives are better here on earth, and the more people are brought into the communion of what it means to be a part of this great movement that God has initiated with Jesus. And here we have in this second chapter of the letter, where Paul says that, again, the salvation of God, the salvation of all, is God's plan. And it first begins with the Jews, and then it will move to the Greeks. So the whole idea of incorporating the fullness of humanity, as Paul understands it at the time, into this great work of God. Do not disparage what God is trying to do. Do not ignore what God is trying to do. Do not move what God is trying to do to the edges and to the margins as unimportant, because it is, for Paul, as he's trying to tell the Romans, the most important thing you will ever hear and ever embrace in your lives. We move to Luke's gospel, in which now the woes to the Pharisees that we heard from Matthew are kind of just repeated. And so this whole idea, again, about the Pharisees caring more about themselves and about their titles and about the place that they have in society, that they afflict people rather than trying to show them a way that is good, a way that is helpful, a way that brings life to them. And at this part of it, the scholars of the law begin to object, because again, their part is trying to show people, what is the proper way to honor God. And a scholar of the law says to Jesus, you insult us too when you say these kinds of things. And Jesus says, well, you should be insulted, because you really are not showing people, the proper way to God. You're basically trying to lay upon them burdens which are too heavy to carry, because again, it makes them turn to you. It makes them see you as the only guide, as the only ones that are important for their salvation, when actually it is God and God alone who is important. Important for us to remember, again, always when we find our church sometimes giving us too many things that seem to be inconsistent with the gospel, and too many things that don't seem to work if we're listening to what it is that Jesus says we should do and be and act in this world. If we're not attentive to those things, then basically we go down a road that is not really inspired by God, inspired by the gospel, and not really healthy or good for us in our own welfare. A blessed day, St. Francis and people of God. May the Lord give you his peace.